Hi, welcome to Wisdom Lab. In this video, we're looking at the first chapter of Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. I've called it Rule 13, and I'm joined by Tristan Scifo of Purpose Advisory as we unpack this together.
Great. Welcome. And I've invited you along to share this wonderful chapter of Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. And particularly, we want to look at the first chapter, which relates to what I'd call Rule 13. He's calling it Rule 1 in the book here, actually. But I'd call it Rule 13 because he's already, in the first book, he's related 12 rules. To me, this is the 13th rule. And the name of the chapter is Do Not Carelessly Denigrate Social Institutions or Creative Achievement.
It's a mouthful, hey?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a pretty radical idea. And even relating social institutions and creative achievement is quite an unusual thing to put together.
Yeah.
Maybe in a way he's suggesting that social institutions are in some way some sort of creative achievement, which I'd have to acknowledge that there's probably some truth in that. There's definitely crossover in that. Some aspects of social institutions are probably not so much seen as creative achievement, but other aspects most definitely. What I've done, and I think you've done as well, we both had a look at the chapter and I've picked out some highlights, and maybe you can raise any highlights as well. But the first aspect that I see, he lays out the story of one of his clients, which is titled Loneliness and Confusion. And he really talks about a person who for many, many years felt incredibly isolated and really struggled with his mental health, depression, and just being socially disconnected. And then he unpacks how through the process of therapy, just talking to someone, he was able to step by step over a period of
decade.
Years.
More than a decade, he said.
Yeah, more than a decade. To step out of that isolation and depression into really quite a healthy, balanced life. And really what he was using it as a way of illustrating how people in isolation tend towards dysfunction, mental illness, either in sort of minor or towards even major ways. He then uses that as a basis to go into what I've picked out as the first highlight. This man ended up being able to be reading original poetry in front of small groups, and had even tried his hand at stand-up comedy. And I mean, that's a sign of someone who's ended up really quite socially confident and quite competent. And then I'll just read out from that point. He was the best personal and practical exemplar of something I'd come to realize over my more than 20 years of psychological practice. People depend on constant communication with others to keep their minds organized. We all need to think to keep things straight, but we mostly think by talking. We need to talk about the past so we can distinguish the trivial. So maybe we'll stop here. Really, it seems to me this is the core of the chapter, in that he's sort of saying our mental health is really connected with our social connection in a powerful way. And then he talks about how we need to think to keep things straight, but we mostly think by talking. What's your thoughts? I'd love to get some thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think it's a really potent point, which in my personal experience was useful for me. This idea that I cannot rely on myself and that my next stage of development relies upon the interaction with others.
Yeah.
I think the point he's raising on a more base level is that, as you said, isolated individuals can't even effectively function, can't even survive, typically don't thrive, can't produce wealth, don't have healthy relationships, don't have positive experiences. And that's probably a base point of humility that, wow, I'm only at the point I am as a 30 something year old with a family, feeling confident about my life, literally only because of the social interactions I've had and the infrastructure that's been built around my life. Everything from my parents growing up, the church and school, the university institutions, the mentors, the friends, people like yourself. And I think without being direct about it, I think Jordan is calling us to recognize that, at least through this example. And it's a beautiful place to start, because he discusses at that point where you ended the quote is talking through the past to make sense of it. And in many ways, that's what you and I are doing, where you and I both, external processes to some extent. And so we're fleshing out our understanding of this book. It's a difficult book to comprehend. And so we're wanting to do that through this interface of you and I and the friendship we have. And even the context of sharing our wisdom with a community, that becomes an infrastructure by which we can grow. I've put more time and focus on preparing this chapter, and therefore I have better understanding of it than I ever would have left to my own devices because of the infrastructure of this conversation. I think that's a beautiful example of, I think, what Jordan's getting at. And going back to my first thought, which is my current state of development, I'm now acutely aware, I think largely because of this chapter, when I first read it 3 months ago, that I've focused a lot on my personal development, on being capable, solid, stable, more aware of what's going on, more willing to let go of things. I guess I'm now at a point where I feel like I understand the way that things flow in life. And there's a sense of, I think, peace, of acceptance that's come with that, which is something I didn't have very tangibly in the past. There was a sense of uncertainty, maybe some angst around why things are the way they are. I don't think I have all the answers now, but I definitely have a greater sense of peace, that I'm curious and learning, but I haven't got it all worked out, and that's okay. And that's only fueling me to be more curious. So it's a very healthy cycle. But I think that's very one-sided, because there's a lot of navel gazing. There's a lot of personal development without really building into those around me. And those around me aren't growing to the same extent that I am, including my wife, including some of my colleagues. And that's not healthy, and it's not very enjoyable as well. It's limited. And I can tell that the next stage of my development is to refocus back on the collective, on these institutions that I'm in. And I think that in my focusing on myself, I have probably not denigrated, but I've devalued the importance, or minimized the importance, of these social institutions, these infrastructures, even friendships. I've devalued the role of friendships in my life and let them almost, waste away a little bit. And I guess that's the personalization of this point for me.
Wow, that's great. I think that's wonderful, because in you there's this real clear personal example, and in you there's this sort of microcosm of really the macrocosm of what our society's doing, is towards as becoming more and more isolated and more reliant on technologically and AI mediated relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a similar breakdown in the quality of the connection.
Yeah.
That maybe previously was a support, that as those societal links break down, there's also a breaking down of the sort of general mental health of that society and the members of it.
Of course. For those of us who are very, I guess, connected and generous, or not generous, compassionate and naturally connected to those around us in need, they're the ones that see it the most, especially those who have family members who are suffering. Or I don't have many single friends, but I was speaking with someone yesterday whose best friend or colleague at work is single and living by herself. And in Sydney, in the lockdown at the moment, like that's really getting to her, and she's crying on the phone to my friend every night, every single night, and that's causing stress for my friend. Now, I don't see that. I hear the anecdotes about it like that. I've read articles, but I'm not exposed to it, and my personality type is not the one to seek this out either. So I guess it's easy for me to look at the spectrum of society and go, look, there's those of us who are not so affected and those of us who are, and I can kind of even turn a slight blind eye to what's going on. But I think what's also curious is to then look at each of our individual lives, rather than looking at there's some people who are affected a lot and some of us that aren't, go, which parts of our life are being affected? What parts of my life are now currently limited? Even if it's not, a really painful impact, it might be a subtle denigration or a minimization. And I think that's confronting. One of those areas for me has been limited friendships. And I think it's also been a higher sense of agitation, just generally. And I've been slightly intentional about being more physical and being more active. But that's even harder because we're more sedentary now. And I found that on the whole, I'm less stable. Even if it's like a 3% increase in agitation, it's there, it's noticeable. So this one factor is affecting everybody across the spectrum. Even though we only report on the suicides and the cases of depression, I think we need to be a bit more aware of how is it affecting each of us, no matter where we stand and how solid we might be or feel that we are.
It's a process that's gradual. It's not like a sudden loss. Sure, with a lockdown and so on, that's a sudden sort of loss. But this process has been going on a very long time in our lives, and something like the lockdown then exacerbates it. And if people don't have really strong social connections, then just their normal casual connections, like maybe through work and through clubs and things like that have been their sort of network, their social network, when that's removed, all of a sudden they're left with very little. And that's really tough.
Yeah, it is.
And like you say, is that we're not sort of investing in building strong, quality, committed relationships, sort of mutually beneficial relationships, then, we end up isolated and not able to sort of continue to grow and develop at the level that would be more healthy and more desirable for everybody. Right. So, we need to talk about the past so we can distinguish the trivial, overblown concerns that otherwise plague our thoughts from the experiences that are truly important. And that's sort of what you're talking about, is that agitation thing is often what can happen, is that unexamined sort of thoughts allowed to sort of bounce around in our head can grow into something beyond what really they're worthy of.
Yes.
And sort of rob us from clarity and rob us from being able to be present in what we're seeking to do and what we're seeking to sort of enjoy in our life. So we need to talk about the nature of the present and our plans for the future. So we know where we are, where we're going, and why we're going there. And so what he's really saying here is it's important that we have relationships whereby we're able to talk about these things in a way with someone, I guess, who's trusted and who isn't going to be too reactive. Because the difficulty with talking to some, say, members of our family or close relationships, it's too consequential. It's too this, and the ability to be able to say problem solve and just talk through these are the options of where maybe I'd like to be going or where I think we should be going, and sort of creatively think through present situations needing solution, and also creatively consider plans for the future. And and that's it's difficult to have those sorts of relationships are not easy to come by.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Well, I think a useful lens that I have when I'm looking at this topic, which I wanted to share just to probably even frame my own perspective, is I use personality quite a lot in the backdrop of the way I assess things.
Yeah.
And me and my cohort have personality types Jordan Peterson just by watching a number of hours of his videos. And you and I have also personality typed each other. And what's interesting is you, me, and Jordan all have quite similar personalities. And I think some of the key hallmarks are relevant to what we're talking about is we're both, all three of us are very naturally self-oriented rather than being naturally tribe-oriented. We're more responsible for ourselves than the tribe. We're also more, I guess, logical than feeling-oriented.
Yes.
So I guess we're logical-oriented. And then on the flip side to that, we're also much more open to new ideas and the chaos of things and I guess exploring rather than focused on structured organization, coming back to the same, getting things in their place. And not just are we looking for the novel, we're doing it in a very intuitive, imaginative way. We're not so much focused on the details, although they matter. We're more focused on the ideas. What are the patterns? So we're constantly looking to collect ideas. And what's curious about that personality type especially is we're quite prone to tinkering on our own things. We're often left our own devices, stuck in just gathering more and researching and thinking and not coming to progress. And for someone like Jordan, and he shared this in his own journey, and I think it's evident in his first book, cleaning up the room and getting things in order and structuring things is so vital because it's the antithesis of his personality. His bias towards looking for more concepts and not putting things into categories all the time. And that is manifest when it comes to planning and structuring. It's very hard to come up with a set of 1, 2, 3 things that you do consistently and repetitively. Our personality types push away from that. It's like, don't put us in a box. And obviously we mature and we manage that. And Jordan's, went on his own journey to largely moderate that personality bias, but you can see it in all of his work. You can see it in the way he writes. It's still very scattered. You can see these various threads of ideas that he's unnecessarily passing into the same chapter, kind of because he sees the relevance, he sees the curious, and he wants to build them together and see how they work. And I wouldn't say that my personal view is he hasn't adequately abstracted away the ideas in this chapter. There's too many and they cloud the message, although they're beautiful. And I think you and I appreciate them a lot. The point, I think, with Jordan's sentence that you just described is that the three of us talking through in a very extroverted way is like a natural bias in the way that we process our thinking. In fact, we don't come to conclusions of how to do things if we aren't able to process it with others very well at all. Whereas some other personality types are not that way inclined. In fact, some personality types get to the 1, 2, 3 just in their own head without talking with anyone else. It doesn't mean it's the best, but they come to that very quickly. Where they struggle is probably opening their mind to new ideas and challenging the current theory with maybe a new way of doing things and updating it because they can get stuck in their ways. We don't get stuck in our ways. We just get stuck full stop. We don't move. We think and ponder.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting because in a sense, him underlining this thing of how don't denigrate society, at some level, he's talking sort of about himself in that not just going off on some tangent somewhere that's unconnected, which he'd naturally have a tendency to do. And I think that's probably true for you and I think.
Yeah.
And in a sense, so committing to some sort of social connection and seeing that it is of profound value rather than just a reluctant sort of necessity is, like you say, there's a humility to that society and others who have a different way of seeing things are valuable to us.
Yeah.
And we don't have all the answers, and it's really important that we balance who we are and our natural tendencies with others who have different perspectives and different experience and different points of view. And they, in the same way that we might have something to offer them in terms of, say, new ways of seeing things or understanding things, they have something to offer us.
And I think that's a beautiful point.
In other ways, yeah.
Well, I was just wanting to take a step back and look at what the first book and what the second book are in many simplified senses. That the first book is primarily for those who are on the chaos end of the spectrum, learning to put in place the structures that need to be put in place to kind of bring some order to the chaos, which is, the first 12 rules for life. Whereas the second book is, I think, what you were just describing. So you can get stuck in the tyranny of that order sometimes, and you need to allow challenging. And I think it's curious that he put this as the rule 1 for the next set of 12, because in many ways, I think it actually fits in the first 12. This idea of not denigrating the institutions or the currently established norms, it does act as a nice launch pad into how to open your mind to chaos.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's reinforcing the existing order. So I don't know if you see it the same as I do. It's like it really is part of the first 12. It's somehow got smuggled.
Well, maybe
maybe
what it is that it's, in a sense, taking the whole of the first book and sort of building that as a foundation, like as a platform to then go into where he's wanting to take us beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, and it's true in our lives. It's exactly how it works. Is we have to take on the order of the structure of our family, of language, whereby we submit to all the different sounds and meanings of a language, so that we can partake in the social interaction that then gives to us. So the first step is having those social categories and different types of order impressed upon us, so that then we can use that to be able to express maybe something within us out through those patterns of order, to maybe build on that to go somewhere further, or somewhere that we see as being important or valuable. I feel the order and structure that I was given growing up in rural New Zealand, with my parents, my father's a lawyer, my mother was a school teacher, and both of them had this really strong sense of sort of social order and structure and discipline, and
right.
It was really strong within the culture. Dad had gone to the World War II. He'd trained as a pilot. All of it, the whole of society coming out of World War II had this sense of order and discipline and structure. And we'd been able to, if we all worked together as a society, we could overcome this sort of seemingly incredible threat of evil coming upon us and destroying our life and our lifestyle and our future, when we all worked together. So there was this really strong cohesion so me growing up in the 50s in sort of rural New Zealand, that was just so strong, the discipline of that. And it was almost militaristic, like when we went to the movies, the British national anthem would come on, which was also the national anthem of New Zealand. And everyone in the cinema would stand up.
This is prior to the movie screening, is it? First thing you do?
Just in front of the movie screen. And it would be a picture of just a small brass band, all in sort of military regalia, like British military regalia. Yeah. There was no singing. It was just the instrumental of the God Save Our Gracious Queen, Long Live Our Noble Queen, of the British national anthem. And everybody in the theatre stood up for it. Children, everybody.
Yep.
And that went on into the 60s.
Interesting.
Like the cohesion that we were talking about there is something that's at an incredible level.
And you commenting on this as if it's a positive, and I can see the positive. Is there some sense, especially given your personality, that you wanted to rebel from that you really wanted liberation from it? Maybe just a little bit?
Totally. Massively.
Yeah.
Not as a really young child, as a teenager, massively.
Yeah.
But the whole of society pushed back against it. Well, of the youth of that time pushed back against it because we had not gone to war. Our parents had, maybe, or, but the shadow of that, we were living in the prosperity of the 60s, post-war boom. And that the shadow of that, so the clouds and shadow and threat of all of that had sort of gone. I mean, the Cold War was still there, so, but that wasn't real. That wasn't that wasn't.
Not as a youth, you weren't feeling it. No, of course.
No. So so there was this massive pushback against that social order, and a rejection of really order that had run pretty continuous for thousands of years. There was a pushback. We see the other thing that happened. It was technology. It was the contraceptive pill was massive.
When was that introduced?
I think in the 60s, early 60s. And that had massive social effect. That sort of changed the world in such a fundamental way in terms of the relationship between men and women and careers and it's massively changed our society. Yeah, there was just technology with movies, television. Like when I was 8 years old, television came to New Zealand. We didn't have any television prior to me being 8 years old. And so the social cohesion was really at a very local level. There was a sense of community. And so when people went to the movies, and that was this sort of influence from society beyond our local rural community, which was very conservative. And so with television coming, that broke down the local social order, and we connected into this more international sort of social order. And
which threatens and challenges the cohesion.
Yeah,
it brings this difference, and it enables individuality because you can watch your own channel. You don't have to watch the same film as everyone else.
No, you got to understand. There was only one channel. There was only one.
Oh, there was only one channel. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It was the government. It was the government channel.
Really?
And that's all there was in New Zealand. Eventually, in the 70s, there was a second.
Also, for a decade, there was still just one channel. Amazing.
Yeah. So that was in one sense, it was unifying. In the other sense, it was connecting to the international sort of.
Well, that's right. And even from the first inclusion or introduction of digital interfacing, it was breaking away from purely flesh-to-flesh, face-to-face contact to now person to screen. We're seeing a lot of that these days. Every 6 months there's a new technology pulling us more into the screens, but that was like from zero to something. That would have been very interesting.
It changed like within sort of probably 2 years. The social cohesion in that small town changed.
Really?
People, families where before they'd come together to entertain and enjoy each other's company. That's what entertainment was. Or they'd go to the movies, and that would be social. They'd all go to a place.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, people were just staying at home and watching television.
Amazing.
And they were getting so much entertainment from that. So people's ability to play piano, to sing, to be the person who tells jokes.
That's right. That was role previously.
All of a sudden, all these skills and social connections where people, maybe they may not have been seen as a person of status in their job, but in terms of being able to entertain or being to play an instrument or do something, they had a role and they had status through that. Well, that was gone.
Yep.
Because that was replaced by these products being sent via technology from, some central curated industry. That was my experience. I'm sure traditional life in, let's say, Sicily, for your grandparents or, generations back, that would have been extremely cohesive. There would have been all these festivals and church and just rituals that were social would be happening all the time.